Hi guys, so today I'm going to be focusing on the film Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee, and I'm going to be honest, going into the film I actually wasn't very sure what to expect because I hadn't really heard a lot about it. I heard some things about it, but I didn't fully know. I have seen a Spike Lee film before, and the one that I watched was Bamboozled, which if you haven't seen it, is kind of like Do the Right Thing, and it calls out the racist ways of white people towards minorities and how they think that the things that they do are okay to say or to do. So I had an idea that it was going to be like that, but I wasn't sure, and then it did end up being like that. I did actually end up really liking the film, but I'm not sure if anybody else would have thought it, but if I hadn't known that the film was made in 1989, I probably would have thought that it was recent just because so many of the things that occurred in the film are still happening, which I guess would go with history repeating itself, as they say. But it was very interesting to me because I was like, this happens now, which I guess kind of just proved that there's no progression in society because it was crazy. But some of the things that I found interesting within the film that really stood out to me, I really liked the diegetic sound with the use of Public Enemy's Fight the Power because it was incorporated in the film because they talked about how Radio Raheem only played that song or he only played Public Enemy. And a lot of the time it was that song because obviously he wanted to stand up for who he was and the rest of the people who were just like him and the minorities and how he thought that they should fight back against all the wrongdoings that were being done to them. Along with kind of sound and language, I thought it was really interesting the amount of slang and derogatory terms and stereotypes that were being used within this film, which obviously it helped relay the message of the issues around the racism in this neighborhood and how even though there are all these minorities in here, they're still being discriminatory towards each other, trying to prove that one minority is more superior than the other, which it could actually have an example from when the Hispanic boys on the stoop wanted to listen to their salsa music and Radio Raheem came and they were trying to fight over whose volume would be louder. So they were like sort of trying to prove that one of them was more superior than the other. Um, I also thought that it was interesting when the mayor came into the pizzeria at about minute 12:45 because he came in to try and help and Pino asked his dad why he keeps giving this Azu Pep $1 and I kind of stopped and I was like, okay, so it must be an Italian word. So I looked it up and its literal meaning is a black pepper that's used in Italy, but it can be used as a derogatory term towards African Americans and drunk people, which the mayor is both of them. So it was interesting to me that even though he was just trying to come in there and trying to help them out, which he ended up doing a job that Pino didn't even want to do. So I thought it was interesting that Pino was being so rude to someone who was doing something that he wouldn't. Um, Other than that, the use of all the stereotypes and the derogatory terms that got used in the scene from minute 47:45 ish to 48:45, there were so many stereotypes within all of those scenes, and it was really crazy to me because I was like, wow, people really do still say things like this. And this film is just relatively old, but it was interesting to see all of them being so rude to each other, even though a majority of them were minorities themselves. Um, aside from that, when it came to the production, the close-ups that were being used, I thought were really interesting. Mainly all of them had to do with Radio Raheem that I thought were really good or really proved something. I really liked the close-up of Radio Raheem's rings that he had that spelled out love and the other one spelled out hate, and how they were on two separate hands, obviously, because one side is love and one side is hate. And it kind of made it seem like how the neighborhood was. It was either you loved everyone or you kind of hated everyone who wasn't within your own race, which is how the entire neighborhood seemed up until after the altercation that happened at Sal's Pizzeria towards the end. They all either loved each other or they hated each other. And I thought it was really thought-provoking with his rings. Aside from that, the close-ups that they used when Radio Raheem was being choked by the police officer, because they zoomed in on his face and then they zoomed in on his feet to show that he wasn't resisting, he wasn't fighting back, he couldn't. He had no ability to fight back against this police officer that was trying to choke him out. He literally wasn't standing on the ground, so there was no way he could defend himself. He couldn't breathe, which also is a look at how things are so similar from back then to now, because that's still happening. There are still people being talked about in the news for being choked that exact same way by police officers now. And I also thought it was interesting that that one police officer kept looking at the one who was choking him, telling him to stop, and he told him to shut up because he just didn't care that he was killing Radio Raheem. And then I kind of thought there was a strong use of irony in this movie, because Sal talked about at one point how all these people in this neighborhood helped build this place. They helped support his pizzeria. They were the reason he was still open. But I thought it was really ironic that the people who helped support him were ultimately the people who brought him down in the end. But ultimately it was his fault because of the choices of words that he decided to use and his way of thinking, and how he couldn't get out of his thinking that white people are superior. But I thought it was ironic that the ones who helped him were the ones who harmed him in the end. And then one more thing that I found really interesting and that I thought was kind of foreshadowing was when Radio Raheem was in the pizzeria and Sal ended up breaking his radio. So ultimately, Fight the Power stopped. And I thought it was kind of foreshadowing as to how Radio Raheem was ultimately going to come to an end, because he was always walking around with that radio. He was always playing that song. So it was as if the moment that that song stopped was when something bad was going to happen to him. There was no time within this entire film that you did not see Radio Raheem without this radio. You didn't hear him playing this song. And even when it started to act up, he went and got batteries for it. So I thought it was kind of foreshadowing that something was going to happen to him right after that, because that was his radio. That was who he was. His name was literally Radio Raheem. Like, that was who he was. So the fact that his radio was broken kind of seemed to me like something was going to happen to him ultimately, and then it did. Overall, I really enjoyed the film, and I think a few of my questions would be, who your favorite person within the film was. Honestly, mine was Smiley. I really enjoyed Smiley's character. I don't agree that he should have set the pizzeria on fire. However, I think his thinking in his own mind was right. I just really liked how at the end he put the picture of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X up on the wall of fame, because that was ultimately what they were fighting for, which was kind of ironic too, because in the end, who was going to be in there since it was burnt down? I think another one of my questions would be, without knowing the year that the film was made, would you have thought that it was recent, or would you have thought that it was from around 1989? And what was something in the film that stood out to you that is still occurring today? Thank you for watching.